So in our previous videos, we talked about how to enter text and how to format numbers. So let's talk about a practical use of the equations we've learned so far, as well as introduce this idea of referencing other cells. So let's say you're doing an experiment and you're looking at weighing out samples of iron 2 carbonate. Well, the scale in the lab has 4 decimal points, but you've got a mass of 12.3560, so when you enter it, it chopped off the 0. So what you can do, if you want to get these to correct formats, is you can highlight it, go to number, and get to 4 decimal points. So your data at least looks correctly formatted. Now, for this calculation, you want to figure out the mass of sample. And so you've got a couple of options with this. In the previous video, I talked about how you can just call a formula and do 14.6551 minus 12.3560. And in this type of calculation, this is what we would do in order to figure out the mass of iron carbonate. We would take the mass of the sample, weigh paper plus the sample, subtract out the mass of the weigh paper, and we would get the mass of the sample. And you can do this, but this really isn't utilizing Excel to its fullest potential. So let's get rid of that formula. You can hit the delete key. And now let's do what's called referencing. So Excel has the ability to reference other numbers. So if we type equals, and we want to subtract 14.6551 and 12.3560. So if we click on that cell, you see it says B3. B3 corresponds to that cell right there with 14.6551. And if we type minus, and we click, we see a B2 appears. We're telling Excel with this function that we want to find the difference between cell B3 and B2. When we hit enter, we get the exact same number back. So in Excel, not only can you do manipulation of numbers, you can put numbers in other parts of the Excel sheet and manipulate them. Now, you may sit back and say, well, I've got to do this 3 times. Does this mean I have to enter the formula in 3 times? Actually, no. What you can do is you can highlight the cells, going to the right, and you've got a few options here. The easiest one, though, is to take Control R. And what Control R is called fill right. And what it does is it takes your formula and it copies it to each of the cells to the right, but it does it in a very specific way. So you see here it says B3 and B2, and we moved one to the right. When we moved one to the right, it automatically moved the cells we're referencing to the right. So every time you fill to the right, it's going to do a relative reference, meaning that as you fill right, as you move right, it's going to increase the column names inside the formula by 1 every time you move over. And this is going to be true if we did a copy and paste. So let's say we did Control C for copy, and we pasted it over here, G. Well, right now, Excel is subtracting the cell directly above our cell from the cell 2 cells above it. It's going to do the exact same thing here too. Oops, sorry about that. It's going to subtract the cell above it minus the cell 2 cells above it. Now, how do we stop it from doing that? Well, we're going to go to that when we get to moles of sample of material. But right now, this is a pretty efficient way of doing it. So let's say you make a mistake in this number. It should actually have been 12.2696. This is actually far more efficient because if you just enter the numbers in manually, you'd have to go back and correct your formula. But now you've got your Excel sheet set up so this way it will actually do the calculation for you. Now, what about the molecular weight of the sample? Well, again, we can calculate it with a calculator, or we can make Excel do it for us. So it's 55.6 grams for iron, 12 for carbon, and 3 times 16 for oxygen will give us a molecular weight of 115.6 grams per mole for iron carbonate. Now we want to figure out the moles of sample. Well, to figure out moles of sample, it's just the mass divided by the molecular weight. So it equals this divided by that. And if we highlight our cells and we do Control R, you can see it gives you this error, value and divide by 0. So if we look at our formula, it's referenced the cell over it. So since we went 1 to the right, it moved the column over 1. But it did the exact same thing for molecular weight of sample. So this isn't particularly useful. So what we can do is in B6, if we hit the function for command, it's going to put a $sign to the left of B and to the left of 6. Now we can also do that manually. So we can have our B6 and we can put $signs in there. What the $sign tells Excel is that as you're copying cells, if there's a $sign in front of it, that value doesn't change. So we put a $sign in front of the B that tells us that we're always going to be in the B column. If we put a $sign in front of the 6, it tells us that we're always going to be in the 6th row. So now if we do Control R and fill to the right, we keep moving 1 over for every cell we move over, but it doesn't change the reference to cell 6. Now you could also go through and do this manually. This isn't a pretty big Excel sheet, so you could definitely do equals mass of sample divided by the molecular weight. If that's easier for you, feel free to use it. But in general, you can do this absolute reference. So when you put the dollar signs in there, you're telling it absolutely reference the cell, and you can use this as an efficient way to basically fill a formula over without it ever moving the cell over.